course, none of us sitting under the green tarpaulin roof of the command center had the slightest suspicion that the place was bugged, or that the whole conversation was being monitored by a group of nondescript foreign men who claimed to be insurance adjusters. Hicks called for everyone's attention. As soon as he got it, he began explaining another plan. If Dr. Tatopoulos is right, we must act quickly before the situation escalates beyond our control. We can send divisions A, C, and F down into the subways to begin a thorough sweep. General Anderson, who had been scowling in disbelief the whole time, leaned across the table and cut the colonel off with a venomous hiss. Correct me if I'm wrong, Colonel Hicks, but you seem to be suggesting we divide our efforts and open up a whole new front based solely on some wild theory. Nick has come through for us before, Hicks replied. Come through for you? Colonel, your whole campaign has been one disaster after another. You weren't even able to prevent this thing from coming to Manhattan. Excuse me, gentlemen, the governor interjected diplomatically. My assistant has just informed me there's a news report I think we should see. A soldier turned on the television set and we saw the WIDF news logo appear on the screen. It was replaced a moment later by the image of an elderly Japanese man in a hospital bed screaming, Gojira, Gojira. The image froze, allowing us to study the terror that filled the old man's eyes. Right away, I knew something was horribly wrong. A moment later, anchorman Charles Kamen's surgically enhanced face replaced the sailor's. From an old Japanese sailor song called Godzilla, a mythological sea dragon who attacked ancient sailors, to our own modern-day terror. Who is this Godzilla? Where did he come from? And why has he come here? Find out in my special report. In the command center, all attention was on the television screen and WIDF's report. A series of computerized maps popped up, giving the story a visual component. A direct path can be traced backwards from Manhattan to Jamaica, to Panama, and eventually all the way back to the French Polynesians, where the French government has been conducting nuclear tests for several years. It quickly became clear that someone close to the military effort, someone on the inside, had leaked this information to the press. I heard a pencil snap in two and glanced over at Hicks, who was bright red, burning with anger and embarrassment. A member of the expert scientific team the Army has assembled to deal with this unprecedented situation, Dr. Nick Papadopoulos, believes this creature is nesting, using Manhattan's towering skyscrapers and deep subway tunnels as ground zero for the cultivation of an entirely new species. The moment he heard my name, General Anderson swiveled around in his chair and exploded. You went to the press with this? I was stunned. No, I didn't. They mentioned you by name. Yes, they did, but no, I didn't go to them. Calmly, far too calmly, Hicks asked me whether I'd given my copy of the videotape to anyone. No, I assured him. It's still in my tent. I knew exactly where I'd left it, right on top of... And then it dawned on me what must have happened. Oh God, she took it. Everyone around the table stared at me in disbelief, thinking I had betrayed them. I knew it wasn't going to do any good trying to defend myself. Pack up your stuff, Doctor, General Anderson glowered, and get the hell out. You are officially off this project as of now. It was the worst hour of my life. I was humiliated, deeply embarrassed, angry with myself that I'd let everyone down, worried about what this might mean for my future, and deeply wounded by Audrey. Elsie came into the tent as I was preparing to leave. I'm sorry about all this. I really didn't give the tape to anyone. I believe you. Look, Elsie, make sure Hicks finds the nest before it's too late. I'll try, she said, extending a handshake. Bye, worm guy. I had called a cab company, but the dispatcher told me I might have to wait for quite a while, even after I explained that this was an emergency. So I was surprised and relieved to see a yellow taxicab parked right outside my tent. "You got here awfully fast," I said. "Where to?" "Newark Airport. I've got a lot of luggage back here." As I was loading my rain-soaked possessions into the trunk, who should come jogging up but Miss Audrey Timmins, reporter at large. "You're leaving? Why?" She seemed so authentically surprised, but I ignored her and kept packing. "Is this because of me? Because of the story?" "Well, what did you think was going to happen?" She looked at the ground. "You never said it was off the record." "I shouldn't have to, Audrey. You were supposed to be my friend. I trusted you." "Oh, Nick, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to turn out like this. Look, I lied to you. I'm not really a reporter. I'm just an assistant to Charles Kamen. When we broke up and I came to New York, I was so sure I was going to make it, but I haven't. That's why I needed this story so bad." "And you think that made it okay to steal my tape?" "No, it was a horrible thing to do." I got into the cab and turned to her for one last word. "Good luck in your new career. I think you really got what it takes." I slammed the door closed in her face and was pleased when the driver peeled away the moment I was inside. Once we were on the road, I sank back into the seat and contemplated the horrible turn my life had taken. I was certain this episode was going to permanently damage my reputation. My research grants were in danger. I didn't know General Anderson well, but he didn't seem like the type of man who would be satisfied with banishing me from the command center. With such pleasant thoughts drifting through my mind, I'm surprised I noticed that my driver missed the turn for the airport. I leaned forward and saw we were heading into a run-down district of warehouses and factories. I knocked on the partition glass. "Excuse me, I don't think this is the way to the airport." He ignored me and continued to drive. "Hey, buddy, where do you think you're going?" Again, I knocked on the glass barrier, and again, he ignored me. I reached for the door. I was prepared to jump out of the moving car and make a run for it, but both doors were locked from the outside. "All right, that's it. Stop this car right now." To my surprise, the driver obliged. He stepped on the brake and the cab skidded to a stop. "Let me out of here," I demanded. "Unlock these doors." The cabbie turned around to face me. He had heavy-lidded eyes and a salt and pepper beard. In a French accent, he said, "I'm afraid I cannot do that." I gasped. He was the same guy we'd run into on the beach in Jamaica. "Hey, I know you. You're that guy, that insurance salesman." He introduced himself under his true identity. "Agent Philippe Rocher, DGSE. Sounds big. The French Secret Service." "Oh. I thought you might want to know that your friends in the American military have decided not to look for the nest." "How could you possibly know that?" "We know. Trust me." "And why in the world would I trust you?" "Because you're the only one who wants to find the nest as much as I do." The man had a point. If the army wasn't going to go after the nest, someone had to do it. A large door rolled open and we drove into a warehouse. The door rolled closed behind us, pushed by a couple of men dressed in U.S. Army combat fatigues. Stepping out of the cab, I took a look around the room and saw that these fellows meant business. Although there couldn't have been more than 15 of them, they had stockpiled an arsenal that was, in its own way, every bit as impressive as the one the U.S. Army had brought to town. "Why all the secrecy?" I asked Rocher. "Why aren't you guys working with the American government?" "Nick, I am a patriot. I love my country. Can you understand that?" "Sure," I said. "It is my job and my duty to protect my country. Sometimes I must even protect her from herself, from the mistakes she has made. Mistakes we don't want the world to know about." "You're talking about the tests in the Pacific? Oui. As you may know, this testing done by my country has left a horrible mess. We are here to help clean it up. I got the distinct impression that no one besides the people in that warehouse knew about this operation within an operation. Roche gave me the impression that he was fighting a secret war without the knowledge of his superiors. But, looking back, it only makes sense that he tried to leave me with that idea. He knew that if and when we were discovered, none of the officials in Paris was going to admit having approved this paramilitary effort on U.S. soil, or any of the espionage it entailed. We'll probably never know for sure. I thought I also detected a hint that the radioactive mess around the Morora Atoll might be even worse than I believed. Perhaps he'd already found evidence of the creature's first home. He'd already told me more than he should have, so I didn't press him for further details at that point. He led me quickly past the indoor parking lot of military vehicles. Despite the wide selection, the one they seemed to be preparing for the assault on the nest was a white Humvee. A discussion was underway, all in fast-moving French, about how to make the vehicle look more realistic. One of the men brought over photos of a similar Humvee parked outside the command center, and called his comrade's attention to various details, including the serial numbers and a couple of small dents. Striving for authenticity, one man went to get the paint and stencils, while the others carefully kicked dents into the fenders. Roche led me back to the center of the room and introduced me to a man who was eavesdropping on the command center through a set of headphones. He scribbled something down on a notepad, then spoke to Roche mostly in English. They are planning to set a trap at 8:30. Where? Dans le northern sector du Central Park. Upon hearing this news, Roche took me to a larger map of the city, thumbtacked to the side of a huge wooden crate. He scratched his beard, contemplating the army's strategy before turning to me. If Godzilla accepts this fish again, it will give us some time to find the nest undefended. We know how to get into the city, we just don't know where to start looking for the nest. Here, I plunked my finger down on the map. The 23rd Street subway station. This is where we first found the fish and discovered he was burrowing through the subway tunnels. With a little luck, we'll be able to follow his trail directly from there to the nest.
Yeah.
So you are in? I'm in. I've always wanted to join the French Roaring Legion. As the Frenchman and I drove through the ghost town streets of Manhattan, we listened in to one of the Army's protected radio frequencies. O'Neill was supervising a second delivery of fish. A large meadow at the northern end of Central Park, between the reservoir and the Lasker skating rink, was being flooded with spotlights and seafood. Roche, his men, and I slipped underground and were jogging through an undamaged tunnel which was pitch black except for our flashlights. Before long, we came into the 23rd Street station, or what was left of it. After some scouting around, I came across a pile of fish. I recognized it as the same pile O'Neill's soldiers had found the day before. We decided to begin our search for the nest with this tunnel. We set out through the lizard-enlarged train tube, moving more slowly now because our path was littered with 1,000 dangers. Boulder-sized clods of earth, pools of sewer water, bent train rails, and live electrical wires. Suddenly, all the air pressure in the tunnel changed, and a background noise, a humming sound that had been vibrating the walls, cut off. It left us with the feeling of being marooned in a vacuum of silence. They've switched off the ventilation system, I whispered. They're calling him to dinner. The four of us heard a noise which froze us in place. It was a muffled screeching sound that came out of the darkness and vibrated the walls around us. The ground began to tremble. Sections of the walls buckled and began to collapse. Suddenly, something was in the tunnel with us. We trained our flashlights on the source of the sound and saw Gojira's giant claws breaking out a new entrance. In an energetic fury, the 6-foot-long talons scraped away earth, concrete, and steel. After only a few seconds, the opening was large enough for him to squeeze into the tunnel. He did, and came barreling toward us. A large drainage pipe intersected the subway tunnel near our position. It was tall enough to accommodate a man standing upright. We hurried over to the mouth of it, but I lingered in the tunnel, mesmerized by the giant lizard's agility. One of the Frenchmen pulled me into the pipe a moment before the animal blasted past us, the sides of his body scraping hard against the tunnel walls. Little did I know, Audrey and Animal Pilati had decided to make their own journey in search of a story, and were closely following our trail. When we had gone almost a mile, we came into another ruined subway station. Like the last one, it was several stories deep and looked like it had been intentionally hollowed out. All the layers of steel and concrete had been smashed down into a carpet of powdery rubble. The destruction was so complete, we all knew the creature had spent a good deal of time in this place. "Is this Penn Station?" I said, or at least it was. High above, at street level, an immense black hole had been torn in the ceiling. There was just enough light coming through the hole to reveal that there was a huge, cavernous space above us. We thought we were looking up into some sort of cave. Sparking electrical wires provided tantalizing glimpses of a huge, blocky shape resting inside the cavern. "What is up there?" O'Shea asked. We pointed our flashlights up at the blocky shape, illuminating a sign that read Madison Square Garden. Then I realized that we were looking at the Jumbotron scoreboard that once hung at the center of the largest sports arena in the city. It had torn loose from its suspension cables and crashed to the floor of the arena near the immense hole. I asked myself, if the scoreboard couldn't break through the floor, what did? As we peered into Madison Square Garden from below, I knew there was a good chance we had discovered the nest. I gulped and turned to the other men. "I guess we should go up there and have a look." Roche had already started climbing. Meanwhile, in Central Park, the U.S. military was preparing for a showdown of epic proportions with New York City's latest and least desirable immigrant. A new and larger pyramid of fish had been stacked in a soggy meadow near the Lasker skating rink, far from the nearest building. But hidden among the trees lining the edges of the park and lurking in the shadows of the nearest buildings were 20,000 heavily armed soldiers. High atop a skyscraper at the south end of the park, one of the perimeter lookouts heard a suspicious rustling noise. As the soldier peered down, he saw the hunched forward brute stealing cat-quietly up the street. He dug for the radio under his rain poncho and reported the sighting. "Command Center, we have visual on the target. He's headed north toward Sector 5. The 20-story high lizard was reluctant to leave the protection of the midtown skyscrapers. He hesitated in the shadows, his wide feet rooted to the ground. His only movement, the slow flapping of his bony dorsal fins. Suddenly, he scampered 2 blocks closer to the trap, then quickly ducked into a new hiding place, crouching alongside the imposing Dakota apartments. "Hold your fire," O'Neill's voice said steadily. "We don't shoot until he's clear of the buildings and into the park." At length, the crafty, mutated saurian stepped into the open and tiptoed slowly toward the food. When he came within a few body lengths of ground zero, O'Neill whispered into his radio, "Prepare to fire." The sound of 1,000 guns cocking simultaneously gave the beast a sudden case of cold feet. Hunching low to the ground, he began to slowly back away, turning as he went. Hicks, miles away, but monitoring his computer screen, didn't understand what the hell O'Neill was waiting for. He screamed into the handset of his radio.
Damn it, O'Neill, fire! Shoot it down before it gets away!
A heartbeat later, O'Neill gave the signal.
Fire at will! Fire at will!
The quiet evening shattered like a powder keg, erupting into a pandemonium of gunbursts and rocket fire. Powerful explosive shells tore deep into the leather of his scale-plated flesh, buffeting the animal's body first one way, then another. In the blink of an eye, the hunted animal turned and charged out of the park. A thwacking roar filled the sky as a fresh squadron of Apache helicopters lifted away from their hiding places and over the nearby rooftops. Fearlessly they bore down on the fleeing reptile. The helicopters threw open their gun ports, blasting away with everything they had. Fountains of blood sprayed from Gojira's wounds. He continued to race westward along 57th, crushing parked cars and swiping the buildings with his tails. The Apaches screamed in from above, riddling his back with shells. The animal, with a tremendous splash, broke the surface of the Hudson River and plunged into its murky depths.
Lost him again,
reported one of the helicopter pilots. Hicks slammed his fist down, jarring the computerized table before him.
It's just a damn lizard. Why can't we kill it?
Admiral Phelps, a calm, thoughtful man who had largely held his tongue until that moment, flashed Hicks a supremely confident smile. Not to worry, Colonel. The Navy has a little something waiting for him down there. The Navy's little something was a trio of nuclear-powered submarines. All three were poised for battle, certain they could handle whatever an unarmed, semi-intelligent amphibious lizard could throw at them. With klaxons blaring through the bridge, the captain of the submarine studied the massive blip moving across his tracking screen.
This is the anchorage,
he murmured into his microphone.
We have a target on sonar and are proceeding to close in.
The captains of the other two subs reported that they were doing the same, following a previously choreographed battle plan.
This shouldn't take long,
one of them said. It didn't take long. Gojira couldn't stand the blast of the submarines. Roche led the way across the foyer and poked his flashlight into what looked like a demolished conference room. The hole in one wall led to a much larger space beyond. Pointing our flashlights through the hole, we saw a confused clumping of rounded objects. I walked past Roche to investigate, and confirmed that we had discovered the nest. 3 enormous eggs, between 8 and 9 feet tall, were resting peacefully on a bed of broken concrete. We moved closer and let our flashlights dance nervously up and down the textured, sticky brown surfaces. 3 eggs? I thought there would be more, I announced. One of Roche's men called out from down the hall.
Nick, there are more.
We followed him through a short hallway to another set of doors that pushed open to reveal the main auditorium of Madison Square Garden. A couple of the men found the main light board and threw a switch. When the stadium's work lights turned on and illuminated the damaged auditorium, we looked out onto a dramatic and stunning tableau. There were hundreds of eggs, and they were everywhere. As I moved around the interior of Madison Square Garden, gathering tissue samples and jotting down notes, the French Secret Servicemen were laying out spools of cable and wiring up several pounds of plastic explosives. I still had my Kodak FunSaver and snapped off several pictures of the egg-filled arena. Roche kicked a fish out of the way as he walked over to where I was, examining a 9-foot-tall egg. The smile on his face told me he was about to give me some sort of bad news.
Nick, we have a problem. We don't have enough explosives. We need you to...
Before he could finish his sentence, an odd sound diverted our attention. What we heard was a slow, sickening, heart-stopping crack. The source of this sound was an egg not 20 feet from where we were standing. We watched in horror as a jagged fracture opened down the belly of the eggshell. The top of the egg shattered, and a glistening green-gray snout pushed into the air and sniffed hungrily at the odor of fish permeating the room. Its thin, leathery lips pulled back to reveal a set of perfectly formed incisors. "I think we should leave now," Rocher said. "Good idea." We backed away slowly up the stairs, careful to avoid startling the hatchling with any sudden movements. Even though he was a feeble and tiny infant by the standards of his own species, he looked plenty strong enough to tear a man limb from limb. It threw back its head and screeched. The animal's cry acted as a primordial alarm clock for his siblings. Eggshells began to gurgle and crack open. Within the space of a few seconds, we were surrounded. We continued stumbling backward up the stairs without once taking our eyes off the fiendish newborns around us. By the time Philippe and I inched our way backwards to the top of the stairs, we found ourselves surrounded by inquisitive reptilian newborns. They moved clumsily at times, stumbling over their own feet or crashing to the floor as they learned to step over the stadium chairs. Although they had us hemmed in, they seemed to be in no particular hurry. For the moment, they were more interested in gobbling up the huge supply of fish the creature had left for them. We slipped quietly out into the hallway, and Philippe whipped off his belt and wrapped it around the door handles, effectively locking them shut. Rocher reached into his utility belt and took out his radio. "Everyone, outside! Now, secure the doors! We have to keep them inside!" Like us, Rocher's 2 men were on the middle level of the stadium. They made it outside in seconds flat, and began sliding anything they could find through all the door pulls, to trap the hungry animals inside. We were aware that this was going to be a next to impossible task. All told, there must have been 200 sets of doors, but at the time, it seemed to be our best option. Rocher and I sprinted down the foyer to the next set of doors. Just then, a group of 5 or 6 of the babies ran past the doorway. Philippe stepped around the corner and closed the doors just as one of the animals charged toward us. It slammed into the doors as Philippe struggled to hold them closed. I noticed a firebox with a thick, carefully folded hose behind a pane of glass. I kicked out the glass and handed the end of the hose to Philippe. As he began wrapping it around the handles, he reached around and unsnapped his phone holster. In one movement, he took the phone out and threw it to me without looking. I caught it. "Contact the military," he grunted, "and get them to send a bomber to blow this building up before these things escape." "What? How am I supposed to do that?" "Call 555-7600. Tell them it's code Dragonfly. That should get you through." I manually speed dialed the number, but the call didn't go through. I got the same results. "All circuits are currently busy. Please hang up and try your call again." "What did they say?" "I can't get through. The circuits are jammed." Both of Rocher's men ran up from opposite directions to report all the doors on the upper level had been barred from the outside. Philippe came to where I was standing, took the payphone receiver away from my ear and hung it up. "Nick, you have to go to the outside. My men and I will hold him here as long as we can. You must go and get help." Without another word to me, the 3 of them took off running in different directions. Even before I made it to the bottom of the stairs, one of the service agents was dead. Philippe told me later that a few seconds after they'd split up, he received word that the animals had freed themselves. The second serviceman was killed after checking on his first comrade's disappearance. I can only imagine the grisly way they met their ends. I tore down the stairwell and burst through the door at the bottom. I headed left, keeping my eyes peeled for an exit. I heard a loud crash ahead. One of the unsecured doors into the stadium blasted open and a dozen scaly, man-eating infants spilled into the hallway, tripping and falling over one another. I quietly began backing away. The baby Godzillas watched me curiously, but allowed me to escape. Once I had backpedaled around the bend in the room, I turned and broke into a full run. But I didn't get very far. Another pack of them was coming from the other direction, and I found myself surrounded. I raced over to an elevator and pounded on the call button. The doors rolled open and I leapt inside. Frantic to escape, I held my finger down on the closed door button. The elevator jerked upward. Only then did I realize that in my frantic attempt to close the doors, I'd punched every single button on the control panel. The doors opened again at the mezzanine level. Directly in front of me was another group of lizards. They had ransacked one of the snack bars, and the one closest to the elevator was tearing into a plastic bag of popcorn. He dropped the bag of junk food and wriggled his fleshy nostrils in my direction, sensing a more nutritious meal. Once again I beat a tattoo on the closed door button. When at last I returned to the mid-level hall where I'd left my companions, I found something worse than hungry man-sized lizards. There was an automatic rifle pointed at my head and a finger on the trigger. "Hey, it's only me," I said. Roche lowered the gun and we both took a deep breath. "What happened?" "They're loose," I panted. "I couldn't even get to the lobby. There are too many of them. They're all over the place." We heard a noise. It was directly overhead and seemed to be coming from one of the big ventilation tubes. The barrel of Philippe's rifle followed his eyes toward the ceiling, when the entire vent collapsed. Yelling and screaming, two bodies spilled onto the floor. I recognized the one in the beret, and despite the circumstances, felt strangely glad to see her. In a flash, Philippe had the muzzle of his gun butted against the back of Animal's skull. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. The cameraman lifted his hands into the air and closed his eyes as tightly as he could. "It's okay. I know her." Roche took the gun away from Animal's head, then quickly stepped over him to where the video camera was lying on the floor, and stomped down on it with his boot. The camera broke into several pieces. Animal was furious. "Why'd you do that?" Roche looked at him with those heavy-lidded eyes and explained, "No cameras." "What are you doing here?" I asked Audrey, helping her up. She didn't seem all that happy to see me. "I thought you said there'd only be 10 or 12 eggs." As if it was somehow my fault. "I was wrong," I admitted. We heard snouts thumping against a nearby locked door. The lizards, eager to expand their hunting grounds, were reacting with increased frustration to boundaries and obstacles. Also immediately the thumping intensified. Very soon our quiet hallway would be a saurian stomping ground. "Do you have a radio?" Philippe asked. "A walkie-talkie, anything we can use to contact the outside." They didn't. "What about the phones?" "All the circuits are overloaded." Suddenly Audrey lit up. I know how you can get a message out of here." She was awfully pleased with herself, but the smile disappeared when the door gave way and baby Godzillas tumbled headlong into the hallway. "This way!" Audrey cried as she took off running. We chased after her and the baby Godzillas chased after us. Unbelievably, Animal turned back. He couldn't bear to leave the scene without retrieving what he'd come for. He wanted the videotape out of his camera, but by the time he got to it, the herd was nearly on top of him. He jammed the tape into the pocket of his jacket, threw a trash can into the path, and broke into a mad sprint. "Come on, the broadcast booth is right over here," Audrey said. We looked back down the hallway. We deadbolted the door, but we could see it wouldn't hold them back for long. Audrey opened the broadcast booth. By the time I turned around and saw that we were in a room crammed full of audio and video equipment, Audrey was already seated at the room's computer terminal, booting up. "The network is on an internet," she told us. "It's a direct feed into the WIDF computer system." I didn't want to rain on her parade, but I'd been on the phone for the last 20 minutes and knew the circuits were flooded. Your station isn't going to have an easier time contacting the military than I did. They just get a busy signal. Hold on a sec, Animal said, a light bulb going on above his head. We'll go live. We'll broadcast right from here. Hopefully the military will see it. He switched on the room's television set. Charles Kamen's talking head filled the screen. Audrey's image abruptly replaced Kamen's on television screens across the region. Audrey sucked in a quick breath and turned to the camera. A completely different person. It was really quite impressive. Hello, this is Audrey Timmins with a late-breaking report of the utmost importance. We are coming to you live from the broadcast booth high atop the western sideline of Madison Square Garden with important news concerning the fate of our city. I'm here with one of the world's leading experts on radiation contamination, Dr. Nico Totopoulos, who has discovered the beast's lair. Doctor, could you step in here and tell us what you believe is happening? Audrey and Animal both waved me forward. Reluctantly, I stepped into frame. Well, we've discovered eggs. Hundreds of very large eggs which began hatching only moments ago. Just then, the door at the end of the hall broke free of its hinges and slammed to the floor like a sonic boom. In fact, I said, glancing away toward the sound, I think I hear them coming now. Elsie and Mendel bolted toward the conference table and interrupted one of Sergeant O'Neill's stories. They each took an arm and hoisted Colonel Hicks out of his chair, pulling him across the room. They shoved their way through the crowd of enlisted men watching the broadcast and stood him in front of the television set. When he looked at the screen, he saw me. I was still being interviewed by Audrey. So that's why, if the military is listening, they should destroy this building, immediately. Before any of these animals escape. In fact, if it's possible, the entire block should probably be destroyed, just to make sure. Audrey screamed, before quickly regaining her composure. Excuse me, Doctor, but they're coming. She issued an order to her cameraman. Shoot it. Animal whipped the camera around toward the hallway windows. I have to admit, the sight of those little bruisers closing in on us made me very nervous. In fact, I was on the verge of losing my cool completely. Doctor, tell us what will happen if Madison Square Garden isn't destroyed. If those creatures escape and multiply, in a very short time a new species will emerge, one that could replace us as the dominant species of this planet. By the time I finished stammering, Hicks was already on the hotline with the same man he'd spoken to when he needed several tons of fish. That's right, he yelled into the receiver. I want those F-18s turned around, and I want them to blow up Madison Square Garden. Elsie, Mendel, and nearly everyone else under the command center tent watched transfixed as Audrey stepped up to bring her report to a close. Regardless of what happens to us, the important thing is that this building is destroyed before these babies break out into the city. We'll do everything we can to help contain them in here. You do what you have to do out there. Good luck to us all. Broadcasting live from Madison Square Garden, this is reporter Audrey Timmins for WIDF News. Animal was at the terminal reading the message. Well, the good news is our friends in the military were watching and they got the message. The bad news is they're going to give us what we asked for. He turned around and flashed a sarcastic smile. We got precisely 5.5 minutes to get out of the building. The newborn killers were anxious to join us in the booth. They were clever like their father and had found another way to reach us. They invaded the luxury boxes on either side of the broadcast booth and began pushing against the flimsy walls.
Okay, the party's over, Rocher announced. Now it's time to leave.
I saw him tying a spool of coaxial cable to the leg of a heavy steel table. He He pointed his machine gun and sprayed the windows facing the auditorium with bullets. He used his boot to clear the last jagged pieces away, then tossed the spool of cable out the window.
Anyone care to join me?
He asked dryly. He rappelled backward out of the window, with one hand on the cable and the other firing his semi-automatic at unseen beasts below.
Who is that guy?
Animal asked. He's from France, I replied. Audrey hopped onto the windowsill, firmly grasped the cable, and took a deep breath, poised at the edge. The windows on both sides of us shattered. Audrey yelped once and vanished over the side. The animals flew into a frenzy, throwing themselves against the walls, snapping their jaws closed in anticipation of their first live meal. I took hold of the cable and dumped myself over the side. The last thing I saw was that madman Animal Pilati struggling to dislodge the booth's video camera from its heavy tripod. When I was halfway down the 80-foot drop, Animal, video camera in hand, did a swan dive over the windowsill. Somehow he managed to reach back and grab the cable, but only with his free hand, and not very tightly. I cringed and shut my eyes as all 180 pounds of him came plummeting down on top of me.